You know that feeling when you walk into your own home and suddenly don't recognize it? When everything you've carefully chosen, every memory you've placed, every corner that felt like you has been altered. Well, that's exactly what happened to me 3 months ago. But what I discovered hidden behind my in-laws' so-called improvements wasn't just about interior decorating, it was about family secrets, hidden treasures, and a grandmother's legacy that would change everything I thought I knew about my own history.
Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you.
My name is Samantha Miller, and at 26, I thought I had figured out the perfect balance between honoring the past and building my future. I'd been married to Jake Thompson for just 8 months, and we were living in the most precious thing I owned, my late grandmother's Victorian house in Cedar Falls, Iowa. The house wasn't much to look at from the outside. Built in 1894, it had weathered siding that I kept meaning to repaint, a front porch that sagged slightly on one side, and windows that rattled when the wind picked up. But inside was pure magic, at least to me. Every room told a story. The living room still had Grandma Rose's faded floral wallpaper, roses and ivy climbing toward the 12-foot ceilings. Her antique furniture sat exactly where she'd placed it decades ago. The burgundy velvet armchair where she'd read me stories, the oak coffee table scarred from years of family game nights, and most importantly, the built-in china cabinet that housed her most treasured possessions. That china cabinet was the heart of the house. Behind its glass doors sat Grandma Rose's complete set of Haviland porcelain, 12 place settings of the most delicate blue and white dishes I'd ever seen. Each piece was painted with tiny forget-me-nots, and when the afternoon sun hit the cabinet just right, the whole collection seemed to glow. Grandma used to tell me those dishes came from her own grandmother, making them 4 generations old. "Someday, Sammy," she'd say, using the nickname no one else was allowed to call me, "these will be yours, but promise me something. Use them. Don't let them sit gathering dust like some people do with their good china. Beautiful things are meant to be part of life, not hidden away." I kept that promise. Jake and I ate off those plates every Sunday, and whenever we had company, out came Grandma Rose's china. It made every meal feel special, like we were honoring something bigger than ourselves. The kitchen still had her original 1950s cabinets, painted mint green with glass fronts that let you see all the mismatched dishes and vintage glassware inside. The countertops were butcher block that Jake and I had sanded and refinished ourselves, and I'd hung dried herbs from the ceiling beams just like Grandma used to do. Upstairs, our bedroom was in what used to be Grandma's sewing room. I'd kept her old Singer machine in the corner, still in its wooden cabinet, though I'd added modern touches, a platform bed Jake built, string lights around the windows, and photographs of our travels together. The whole house was this perfect blend of old and new, tradition and innovation. It felt like home in a way I'd never experienced before, even as a child. Maybe especially because I'd never really had that as a child. See, my parents, well, they were complicated. Mom had always been more focused on her career as a real estate agent than on creating a warm home environment. Our house growing up had been all beige and chrome, modern and sterile. "Clutter is the enemy of success," she'd say whenever I'd tried to display any personal items. Dad was supportive but mostly absent, traveling for work as a pharmaceutical sales rep. The only real warmth in my childhood came from summer visits to Grandma Rose's house. She'd let me help in her garden, teach me to bake bread from scratch, and we'd spend hours going through old photo albums and family stories. When she passed away 2 years ago, leaving me the house was the most generous thing anyone had ever done for me. Jake understood how much the house meant to me. He'd grown up in a military family, moving every few years, so he'd never had the experience of a place being truly home until we settled in Cedar Falls. "This house has soul," he'd said the first time I brought him there while we were dating. "You can feel the love in these walls."
His parents, though, that was another story entirely. Richard and Margaret Thompson were the kind of people who believed there was a right way and a wrong way to do everything. And unfortunately, their way was always the right way. Richard was a successful insurance broker in Des Moines, and Margaret had spent 30 years as a high school principal before retiring. They were practical, efficient, and had very strong opinions about how a proper home should look. From the moment Jake brought me home to meet them, I could tell Margaret disapproved of me. Not in an obvious way. She was too well-mannered for that. But I caught the way her eyes swept over my vintage dress with barely concealed disdain. The slight pause before she complimented my interesting choice of jewelry. The way she'd straighten already straight items whenever she visited our house. "She means well," Jake would say whenever I mentioned feeling uncomfortable around his mother. "She just shows love differently than your family does." The thing was, though, Margaret never seemed to show love at all, just correction. She'd walk through our house making little observations. "This wallpaper is quite dated. You know, dear, open floor plans are much more popular now. Have you considered updating these light fixtures? They're very vintage." I tried to be understanding. Jake was their only child, and they'd probably imagined him ending up with someone more conventional. Someone who'd want to gut renovate Grandma Rose's house into something that looked like it belonged in a home design magazine. But I wasn't that person, and I never would be. The tension came to a head about 6 months into our marriage. Jake had been offered a promotion that would require him to spend 2 weeks training in Chicago. It was a great opportunity. More money, better benefits, and a chance to prove himself to the company. But it meant leaving me alone in the house for the first time since we'd been married. "I don't like the idea of you being out there all by yourself," Margaret had said when Jake mentioned the trip over dinner at their house. "That old place is so isolated. And with all those antiques, what if something happened? What if there was a break-in?" "Mom, we live in Cedar Falls, not downtown Detroit," Jake had laughed. "The biggest crime here is Mrs. Henderson's cat getting into people's garbage cans." But Margaret wasn't laughing. "I'm serious, Jacob. Samantha is a young woman alone in a house full of valuable items. It's not safe." I tried to reassure her. "I appreciate your concern, Mrs. Thompson, but I've spent plenty of time alone in that house. I actually love the quiet, and we have a good security system." "Well," Margaret had said, dabbing her mouth with her napkin in a way that somehow managed to look disapproving, "if you insist on staying there, at least let me come by a few times to check on you. Richard and I could even stay over 1 or 2 nights, just to make sure everything's all right." Every instinct I had screamed, no. But Jake was looking hopefully at me, and I could see how much it would mean to him to know I was getting along with his parents. So I smiled and said that would be lovely, even though the thought of Margaret Thompson inspecting my housekeeping for 2 weeks made my stomach clench. "Maybe this will be good," Jake had said later that night as we got ready for bed. "You and Mom just need more time together. Once she gets to know you better, she'll see what I see." I'd nodded and smiled, but privately, I doubted that. Margaret Thompson and I were never going to be friends. We were too different, wanted 2 different things. But I loved Jake, and if enduring his mother's scrutiny for a couple of weeks would make him happy, I could handle it. Looking back now, I realize how naive I was. I thought the worst thing that could happen would be 2 weeks of awkward small talk and passive-aggressive comments about my housekeeping. I had no idea that Margaret Thompson had plans for those 2 weeks. Plans that would turn my carefully preserved sanctuary into something I wouldn't recognize. And I certainly had no idea what those changes would reveal about my own family's history, hidden away behind the walls of Grandma Rose's house for more than 70 years. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story.
The morning Jake left for Chicago, I actually felt excited about having the house to myself for 2 weeks. I'd planned to tackle some projects I'd been putting off, organizing the attic, finally hanging the gallery wall of family photos I'd been collecting, maybe even attempting to refinish that old rocking chair I'd found at an estate sale. I kissed Jake goodbye at 5:30 in the morning, watched his taillights disappear down our long gravel driveway, and then stood in the kitchen making coffee while the sun came up over the cornfields behind our house. The silence was peaceful, not lonely. This was my sanctuary, and I was going to enjoy every minute of solitude. That peaceful feeling lasted exactly 4 hours. At 9:45, I heard the crunch of tires on gravel. Looking out the front window, I saw Margaret Thompson's pristine white SUV pulling up to the house, followed by a truck I didn't recognize. My stomach dropped as I watched Margaret climb out, already dressed in what I'd come to think of as her project clothes: khaki pants, a sensible blouse, and her hair pulled back in a no-nonsense ponytail. But it was the truck that really worried me. 2 men in work clothes were unloading ladders and what looked like painting supplies. I opened the front door before Margaret could knock, trying to keep my voice light and friendly. "Mrs. Thompson, this is a surprise. I wasn't expecting you until this afternoon." "Oh, Samantha dear," Margaret said, breezing past me into the house with her arms full of fabric samples and paint chips. "I hope you don't mind, but I took the liberty of calling a few people. I've been thinking about what we discussed, about this house needing some updates, and I realized there's no time like the present." I definitely didn't remember discussing any updates. "I'm sorry, what exactly are we doing?" Margaret's smile was bright and determined. "Well, I know how busy you young people are, so I thought I'd help you get started on some much-needed improvements. Nothing major, just some fresh paint, maybe updating some of these older design choices." The men from the truck were already carrying drop cloths and brushes toward my front porch. I felt panic rising in my chest. "Mrs. Thompson, I appreciate the thought, but I really like the house the way it is." "Oh, sweetie," Margaret laughed, the kind of laugh that wasn't really amused. "You know you think you do, but trust me, once you see what a difference a few small changes can make, you'll wonder why you waited so long. This place just needs a woman's touch." The irony of that statement, considering this house had been lovingly maintained by my grandmother for 60 years, wasn't lost on me. But before I could figure out how to politely decline, Margaret was already directing the painters toward my living room. "Now, I was thinking we could start with this wallpaper," she announced, gesturing at Grandma Rosa's beautiful roses and ivy pattern. "It's so busy, don't you think? I brought some lovely neutral paint colors. This soft beige would really open up the space." "Actually," I said, my voice coming out higher than I intended, "I'd prefer to keep the wallpaper. It has sentimental value." Margaret paused, her hand frozen in the act of pointing at my walls. For just a moment, her pleasant expression flickered, and I caught a glimpse of something harder underneath. Then the smile snapped back into place. "Of course it does, dear. But sometimes we hold on to things that don't serve us anymore. Jake mentioned how much you love this old house, but I can see how overwhelmed you must feel trying to maintain all these antiques." She said the word like it left a bad taste in her mouth. "I'm not overwhelmed. I chose to keep things the way they are because I love them." "Well," Margaret said, her voice taking on the patient tone she imagined she'd used with difficult teenagers during her years as a principal, "why don't we just start small? Maybe we could update the kitchen cabinets. Those mint green ones are terribly dated. And that china cabinet in the living room really dominates the space. We could move those dishes to the kitchen, where they'd be more practical." My blood went cold.
She was talking about Grandma Rose's Haviland china like it was a random clutter to be shuffled around. The china stays where it is, I said firmly, and so does everything else. Mrs. Thompson, I appreciate you wanting to help, but I need you to tell these men to stop. This is my house, and I don't want it changed. The pleasantness finally dropped completely from Margaret's face. Samantha, she said, her voice sharp, I'm trying to help you. This house it's like a museum. It's not suitable for a young couple starting their lives together. What will people think when they visit? What about when you have children? You can't raise a family surrounded by all just old, fragile stuff. Children. That was the heart of it, wasn't it? Margaret Thompson was redecorating my house for the grandchildren she imagined having someday, erasing any trace of the family history that had come before her. My house is fine for raising children, I said, thinking of all the summers I'd spent here with Grandma Rose, learning to bake and garden and appreciate beautiful things. In fact, it's perfect. Is it? Because from where I stand, it looks like you're living in the past, Samantha. Jake deserves better than this shrine to people who are gone. The words hit me like a physical blow. Before I could respond, she'd turned away and was speaking to the painters, who had been standing awkwardly by the door during our exchange. Let's start in the kitchen, she told them briskly. Those cabinets need to be primed and painted. I brought a lovely soft gray that will really modernize the space.
Stop, I said loudly enough that everyone turned to look at me. You need to leave. All of you. This is my house, and I'm asking you to leave right now. One of the painters, a middle-aged man with kind eyes, looked genuinely apologetic. Ma'am, we don't want to cause any trouble. Maybe we should come back when everyone's had a chance to talk things through. But Margaret stepped between us, her voice taking on a tone I'd never heard from her before. Not just authoritative, but almost menacing. Gentlemen, I'm paying you for a job, and I expect you to do it. This young woman is clearly upset and not thinking clearly. Why don't you start in the upstairs bathroom while she calms down? I watched in horror as the men, clearly uncomfortable but apparently more afraid of not getting paid than of my protests, began carrying their supplies upstairs. The sound of their footsteps on Grandma Rose's hardwood floors felt like a violation. You can't do this, I said, but my voice sounded weak even to me. Jake will be furious when he finds out. Margaret's smile returned, but it was different now. Colder, more calculating. Oh, sweetie, Jake's the one who suggested we help you fix up the house while he was gone. He said you'd been feeling overwhelmed by all the maintenance, but were too proud to ask for help. The lie was so smooth, so plausible, that for a moment I actually wondered if I'd misunderstood something. Had Jake really asked his mother to redecorate our house? But no, I knew my husband, and he would never have agreed to anything like this without talking to me first. He did not say that, I said, pulling out my phone. I'm calling him right now. Go ahead, Margaret said, settling herself into Grandma Rose's burgundy armchair like she owned it. But you should know that Jake's presentation to the board is this afternoon, the one that could make or break his promotion. Do you really want to distract him with a hysterical phone call about paint colors? I hesitated with my finger over Jake's number. Margaret was right. Today was crucial for him. And what would I even say? That his mother had invaded our house with painters? It sounded petty when I put it like that, even to myself. That's better, Margaret said, watching me put the phone away. Now, why don't you go run some errands? Maybe visit that coffee shop you like in town. Give us a few hours to get started, and then you can see how much better everything looks. The suggestion felt less like an invitation and more like an order. I looked around my living room at the wallpaper that held so many memories, at the china cabinet that had been the centerpiece of every family gathering for 4 generations, at the furniture that still smelled faintly of Grandma Rose's satchels. Upstairs, I could hear the men moving around, probably already starting to strip wallpaper or sand woodwork. Every sound felt like they were destroying a piece of my heart. Fine, I said finally. I'll go out for a while. But Mrs. Thompson, I want you to promise me that you won't touch my grandmother's china or move any of the furniture without asking me first. Of course, dear, Margaret said, but she wasn't really looking at me anymore. She was studying the room with the calculating gaze of someone planning a complete transformation. I grabbed my purse and keys, took one last look at my beautiful, unchanged living room, and left my own house feeling like a refugee. I spent the next 6 hours driving aimlessly through the Iowa countryside, too upset to go into town where I might run into people who would ask me what was wrong, too proud to call any of my friends and admit that I'd just been steamrolled by my mother-in-law in my own home. When I finally worked up the courage to return, it was almost dark. Margaret's SUV was gone, but the painter's truck was still there, and I could see lights on in every room of the house. I sat in my car for 5 full minutes, staring at my own front door, trying to prepare myself for what I might find inside. But nothing could have prepared me for what had actually happened to my home while I was gone. Walking through my own front door that evening felt like entering a stranger's house. The familiar scent of lavender and old wood had been replaced by the sharp smell of paint primer and chemical solvents. Drop cloths covered my hardwood floors, and everything that could be moved had been shoved into the center of each room and draped with plastic sheeting. But it was the walls that made me gasp out loud. In the living room, someone had started stripping Grandma Rosa's beautiful rose and ivy wallpaper. Long strips hung like dead skin, revealing patches of bare plaster underneath. The sections they'd already scraped clean looked wounded, scarred by decades-old paste and the aggressive scraping tools they'd used. "Oh no," I whispered, running my fingers over the damaged plaster. "Oh, Grandma, I'm so sorry." One of the painters, the kind-eyed man who'd seemed uncomfortable earlier, emerged from the kitchen with his hands full of scrapers and sandpaper. When he saw my face, he stopped short. "Ma'am, I want you to know we tried to be as careful as possible with the wallpaper removal. Some of it's been up there so long it took half the plaster with it, but we'll smooth everything out before we prime." "I didn't want the wallpaper removed at all," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. He looked genuinely pained. "I'm real sorry about the confusion. The lady who hired us, she was very specific about her instructions. Said you wanted the whole house updated, but were too emotional about the changes to be here while we worked." Emotional. Of course Margaret had framed it that way. The hysterical young wife who couldn't handle necessary improvements to her home. I wondered what other lies she'd told these men to justify ignoring my protests. "What else has been done?" I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know the answer. "Well, we finished the upstairs bathroom, scraped and primed all the walls, removed that old floral wallpaper, and we got started on the kitchen cabinets. Had to take all the dishes and glassware out to sand properly, but don't worry, everything's packed up safe in boxes." My heart stopped. "What boxes? Where?" "In the dining room, ma'am. The lady said you were planning to get all new dishes anyways, so we just packed everything up together." I ran to the dining room, and what I saw there made my knees weak. Dozens of cardboard boxes lined the walls, each labeled in Margaret's precise handwriting. Kitchen dishes, donate. Old glassware, dispose. Miscellaneous china, storage. But it was the box labeled Vintage China Set Appraisal Needed that made me sink into a chair. With shaking hands, I tore open the box. There, wrapped carelessly in newspaper, were pieces of Grandma Rosa's Haviland china, but not the complete set that had lived in the china cabinet for decades. As I unwrapped piece after piece, I realized they'd only packed the everyday dishes, the cups and saucers, the smaller plates, some of the serving bowls. The display pieces, the large platters, the gravy boat, the soup tureen, the pieces that had been most prominently featured in the front of the cabinet, were nowhere to be found. "Where are the rest of the dishes?" I asked the painter, trying to keep my voice steady. "The ones that were in the living room china cabinet." He looked confused. "Cabinet? We didn't touch anything in the living room except the walls. That lady, Mrs. Thompson, she said she'd handle all the furniture and decorative items herself." A cold certainty settled in my stomach. Margaret had taken the most valuable pieces of my grandmother's china set. While I'd been driving around the countryside trying to process what was happening to my house, she'd been systematically looting it. I pulled out my phone and called Jake's number, my hands shaking so badly I could barely hit the right buttons. It went straight to voicemail. He was probably in meetings or at dinner with clients. I tried again. Voicemail again. The painter was watching me with growing concern. "Ma'am, I want you to know we tried to be as careful as possible with the wallpaper removal. Some of it's been up there so long it took half the plaster with it, but we'll smooth everything out before we prime." "I didn't want the wallpaper removed at all," I said, my voice rising. "This is my house. I live here. I'm telling you to stop." The man looked genuinely torn. "Look, lady, I don't want to get in the middle of family business, but we've already started the work, and if we don't finish, we don't get paid. Can you work it out with Mrs. Thompson and call us tomorrow?" After the painters left for the day, I stood alone in my destroyed house and tried to figure out what to do next. Every instinct told me to call Jake immediately, to demand he come home and deal with his mother's invasion of our home. But Margaret had been right about one thing. This was the most important week of Jake's career so far. His presentation had gone well, according to the brief text he had sent me, but he still had 3 days of intensive training ahead of him. Could I really ask him to abandon that to come home and referee a fight between his wife and his mother over interior decorating? Instead, I decided to handle this myself. I was 26 years old, not some helpless child who needed her husband to fight her battles. If Margaret Thompson thought she could steamroll me while Jake was away, she was about to learn otherwise. I spent that first night researching everything I could online about my legal rights as a homeowner. I learned about trespassing laws, about unauthorized contractors, about what constituted destruction of property. I even found the contact information for a lawyer in Cedar Rapids who specialized in property disputes. But most importantly, I started documenting everything. I took photographs of every damaged wall, every box of displaced belongings, every change that had been made to my house without my permission. If Margaret wanted to play games, I'd make sure I had evidence. The next morning, I was waiting in Margaret's driveway when she came out to get her newspaper. She seemed genuinely surprised to see me there, though she recovered quickly. "Samantha, what a lovely surprise! I was just about to call you. The work is progressing beautifully. You're going to be so pleased with how everything looks." "Where are they?" I asked without preamble. "Where are what, dear?" "The missing pieces from my grandmother's china set. The platters, the serving pieces, the soup tureen. They weren't in the boxes your painters packed." Margaret's smile never wavered, but something shifted in her eyes. "Oh, those old things. They were so dusty and chipped. I thought it would be kinder to just dispose of them. You don't want to serve guests with damaged china." "They weren't damaged," I said, "and you had no right to dispose of anything from my house." "Samantha," Margaret said, her voice taking on that patient, condescending tone again, "I understand you're upset about the changes, but sometimes we have to make difficult decisions for the good of everyone involved. Those dishes were just taking up space, and the cabinet they were in really made the room feel cramped." "I want them back." "Well, I'm afraid that's not possible. The donation truck came very early this morning." The lie was so smooth, so confident, that I almost believed her. But I'd learned something important about Margaret Thompson over the past 24 hours. She was a planner. Someone who organized contractors and supply deliveries didn't just happen to have a donation truck show up the morning after taking items from someone else's house. "Which donation center?" "I'm sorry?" "Which organization picked up the donation? I'd like to see if I can buy the pieces back." For the first time since I'd known her, Margaret Thompson looked genuinely flustered. Well, I don't remember exactly. There are so many charities that do pickups. Goodwill, maybe? Or the Salvation Army? I'll check with all of them, and if I find out you've sold or kept my grandmother's dishes, I'll be filing a police report for theft."
The pleasantness finally cracked completely. "How dare you?" Margaret said, her voice low and dangerous. "After everything I'm doing to help you, to try to turn that museum you live in into a proper home, you have the audacity to threaten me?" "You broke into my house and destroyed irreplaceable family heirlooms," I shut back. "What did you expect?" I expected gratitude. I expected some recognition that I'm trying to help you build a life worthy of my son. But instead, you're so selfish, so obsessed with living in the past, that you can't see what's right in front of you. And what's right in front of me? Margaret's smile returned, but it was cold now, calculating. The fact that Jake asked me to help you with the house because he's tired of living like he's camping in someone else's museum. He wants a real home, Samantha. A place where he can relax, where his friends can visit without feeling like they're going to break something priceless just by sitting down. The words hit me like physical blows. That's not true! Isn't it? When's the last time Jake invited anyone over for dinner? When's the last time he seemed genuinely comfortable in that house? He loves you, but he's too kind to tell you that your obsession with your dead grandmother's belongings is suffocating him. I stood there in Margaret's perfectly manicured driveway, surrounded by her perfectly trimmed hedges and flawless flower beds, and felt something inside me crack. Because as much as I hated Margaret Thompson in that moment, there was a tiny part of me that wondered if she might be right. Had I been so focused on preserving Grandma Rose's memory that I'd forgotten to build a life with Jake? Had my beautiful, history-filled house become a burden instead of a blessing? "I can see you're starting to understand," Margaret said, her voice gentle again now that she'd landed her blow. "Jake is such a good man, and he deserves better than to feel like a guest in his own home. Let me finish the work I started, Samantha. Let me help you give him the fresh start he deserves." I looked at this woman who had invaded my home, stolen my belongings, and was now trying to convince me it was all for my own good, and I felt something I'd never experienced before. Pure, crystalline rage. "You're wrong about Jake, and you're wrong about me. But most of all, you're wrong if you think I'm going to let you destroy my family's legacy because you can't stand the idea of your son loving something that existed before you met him." Margaret's face went white. "What did you just say to me?" "You heard me," I said, turning to walk back to my car. "The work stops today. Get your contractors out of my house, or I'm calling the police." As I drove away, I saw Margaret in my rearview mirror, standing frozen in her driveway, with her newspaper clutched in her hands. For the first time since this nightmare started, I felt like I'd won a battle. But I had no idea that the war was just beginning, and that Margaret Thompson had weapons I hadn't even discovered yet. I thought I'd won something that morning at Margaret's house, but my victory lasted exactly 3 hours and 27 minutes. That's how long it took me to drive back home, march up to the painters who were back at work despite my demands, and discover that Margaret had already called them with new instructions, not to stop the work, but to accelerate it. "Ma'am," the foreman explained apologetically, "Mrs. Thompson said there was a miscommunication yesterday, but that you'd worked everything out. She wants us to finish the downstairs by tonight because the furniture delivery is scheduled for tomorrow morning." "What furniture delivery?" The man consulted his clipboard. "Says here, new living room set, dining room table and chairs, and bedroom furniture for the master suite. She also mentioned something about a dumpster being delivered this afternoon for all the old stuff." My legs went weak. "A dumpster?" "Yes, ma'am. She said you'd finally decided to get rid of all the antique furniture that was cluttering up the place. Makes sense. Some of that old stuff looked pretty worn out. I ran to the living room, and what I saw there made me physically sick. Grandma Rose's burgundy velvet armchair, the one where she'd read me countless bedtime stories, where I'd curled up with books on rainy afternoons, was sitting by the front door with a piece of masking tape marked "Dispose" stuck to its arm. The oak coffee table, scarred from decades of family game nights, had been flipped upside down and labeled the same way. Even the old Singer sewing machine from the bedroom was stacked by the door, its wooden cabinet tagged for removal. But it was the empty china cabinet that broke my heart completely. The built-in shelving unit that had been the centerpiece of the living room for over a century was bare, its glass doors standing open like a mouth screaming in shock. Someone had even removed the small LED lights that had illuminated the collection, leaving dark holes in the wooden backing. "Where is everything?" I asked the painter, though I already knew the answer was going to destroy me. The lady came back with a truck about an hour ago, said she was taking everything to storage while the painting got finished, but between you and me, it looked more like she was heading to one of them estate sale places. Had a couple other folks with her, looked like they might be antique dealers. The room spun around me. Margaret hadn't just stolen a few pieces of china. She'd liquidated my entire inheritance while I was confronting her in her driveway, probably laughing at how easy it had been to distract me while her accomplices looted my house. I called Jake immediately, not caring any more about his meetings or his presentation or his career. This had gone far beyond interior decorating disputes. "Sam?" His voice was warm and happy when he answered. "Perfect timing. I just got out of the morning session. How are things going? Mom said she stopped by to help with some projects around the house." "Jake," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, "I need you to come home right now." "What's wrong? You sound upset." Where could I even begin? Your mother has gutted our house. She's stolen Grandma Rose's china, sold all the antique furniture, and hired contractors to strip off all the original wallpaper. Jake, she's destroying everything. There was a long pause. When Jake spoke again, his voice was different. Cautious, measured. "Sam, slow down. What do you mean she's stolen things? Mom wouldn't steal anything. The valuable pieces from the china cabinet are gone. She claimed she donated them, but the painter said they saw her loading everything into a truck with what looked like antique dealers. And now all the furniture is tagged for disposal. They're about to throw away Grandma Rose's armchair, Jake." Another pause. "Okay, maybe there's been some miscommunication about what was supposed to be kept and what was supposed to go. But Sam, didn't we talk about updating some things in the house? Maybe Mom just got a little overzealous trying to help." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. We never talked about getting rid of my grandmother's furniture. We never talked about stripping the wallpaper or repainting everything. Jake, are you telling me you actually asked her to do this? He sighed heavily. "Look, I may have mentioned that the house felt a little overwhelming sometimes. All those antiques, having to be so careful about everything. And maybe I said it might be nice to update a few things, make the place feel more like ours instead of like we were living in a museum." The word museum hit me like a slap. It was the same word Margaret had used, the same accusation she'd thrown at me. How many conversations had Jake and his mother had about my house, my belongings, my life? "So you did ask her to redecorate." "I asked her to maybe help you think about some small updates, new paint in a few rooms, maybe some modern touches here and there. I didn't ask her to throw away family heirlooms or strip wallpaper or any of the other stuff you're describing." "But you did complain to her about living in a museum." Jake's silence was answer enough. "Sam, I love you and I love that house, but you have to admit sometimes it feels like we're curators instead of homeowners. When's the last time we had people over for dinner? When's the last time we rearranged furniture just because we felt like it? Everything in that house comes with a story, a history, a reason why it can't be moved or changed or replaced." Each word felt like a betrayal. That history is important to me. I know it is, and it's important to me too. But we're trying to build our own history, our own life together. And sometimes it feels like there's no room for that in a house that's already so full of the past. I sank into one of the kitchen chairs, one of the few pieces of furniture that hadn't been tagged for removal. "So you're on her side?" "There are no sides. It's just us. trying to figure out how to build a life together. If Mom got carried away trying to help, then we'll fix it. I'll call her right now and tell her to stop whatever she's doing. It's too late. The furniture's gone, the china's gone, the wallpaper is half stripped off the walls. Jake, they're about to deliver a dumpster this afternoon to throw away what's left of my grandmother's things. Then I'll call and cancel the dumpster. I'll tell Mom to bring back whatever she took. We'll figure this out. But even as he said it, I could hear the exhaustion in his voice. This was supposed to be his big week, his chance to prove himself at the company, and instead he was dealing with hysterical phone calls from his wife about furniture and paint colors. Just come home, I said quietly. Please.
I can't, Sam. You know I can't. This trading program could determine my entire future with the company. Can you handle things there for just a few more days? I promise, as soon as I get back, we'll sort all of this out. After I hung up, I sat in my kitchen and tried to process what had just happened. My husband, the man who'd once told me this house had soul, who'd promised to help me preserve Grandma Rose's memory, had basically sided with his mother. Maybe not intentionally, maybe not completely, but enough. Enough that when forced to choose between my distress and his mother's help, he'd chosen to stay in Chicago and leave me to deal with the aftermath alone. I was still sitting there when Margaret's white SUV pulled into the driveway again, this time followed by a massive furniture delivery truck. Through the kitchen window, I watched Margaret direct the delivery men toward my front door like she was the rightful owner of the house. She was animated, excited, clearly thrilled with whatever transformation she was about to unveil. The front door opened without anyone knocking, and Margaret's voice carried clearly through the house. Just put the sofa where the old armchair was, and the coffee table can go in the center. Make sure it's perfectly aligned with the sofa and the fireplace. I walked into the living room to find Margaret supervising the installation of a complete furniture set that looked like it had come straight from a showroom floor. Everything was beige. The sofa, the chairs, the coffee table, even the decorative pillows. It was expensive, tasteful, and completely soulless. "Oh, Samantha," Margaret said brightly when she saw me. "Perfect timing. I wanted you to see how beautiful everything looks with the new color scheme." The walls had been painted the soft beige she'd mentioned on the first day, and combined with the neutral furniture, the room looked like a doctor's waiting area. Every trace of personality, of history, of warmth had been erased. "Where is my grandmother's furniture?" I asked. "I told you yesterday, dear. It was time to let those old things go. But look how much more spacious everything feels now. And this furniture is so much more practical for entertaining." One of the delivery men was struggling to position the new coffee table, and I noticed he was being careful not to scratch the hardwood floors. Floors that had been in this house for over a century, that had been walked on by 4 generations of my family. "I want my grandmother Rose's things back." Margaret's smile faltered slightly. "Samantha, I understand this is an adjustment, but you need to trust me. I have experience with this sort of thing. I know what works and what doesn't. This room is going to be perfect for when you and Jake start having dinner parties, entertaining his colleagues from work." "I don't want to entertain his colleagues. I want my grandmother's armchair back." "That old thing? Honestly, dear, it was falling apart. The upholstery was faded, the springs were shot. It wasn't suitable for guests." "It wasn't meant for guests. It was meant for family." Margaret's expression hardened. "Well, you're part of our family now, and our family doesn't live like pack rats, clinging to every old thing just because it has sentimental value. Jake deserves better than that." "Stop telling me what Jake deserves," I snapped. "You don't get to decide what's best for our marriage." "Don't I?" asked Margaret, and there was something in her voice that made me go cold. "Because from where I stand, it looks like I'm the only one actually thinking about Jake's happiness. Do you know what he told me the last time he visited? He said sometimes he feels like a stranger in his own home, like he's afraid to touch anything, afraid to suggest any changes, afraid to really live because everything in that house belongs to ghosts."
He didn't say that. He did. And do you know what else he said? He said he's worried about what will happen when you have children, whether you'll be able to let them be kids in a house full of priceless antiques, or whether you'll turn them into little museum curators like yourself. The words hit me like physical blows. Each one was designed to find my deepest insecurities and exploit them ruthlessly. You're lying. Margaret pulled out her phone and scrolled through her messages. Would you like to see the texts he's been sending me this week about how guilty he feels asking me to help, but how he didn't know what else to do? About how much he hopes this will finally help you move forward instead of always looking backward? She held the phone toward me, and I caught a glimpse of Jake's name at the top of a message thread before I turned away. I didn't want to see what my husband had really been saying about me behind my back. He loves me, I said weakly. Of course he does, Margaret said, her voice gentle now, almost pitying. But love isn't always enough, is it? Sometimes people grow in different directions. Sometimes one person gets stuck while the other moves forward. I looked around the room, at the beige walls where Grandma Rose's beautiful wallpaper had been, at the generic furniture where her carefully chosen pieces had sat, at the empty china cabinet that once held 4 generations of family treasures. Everything that made this house my sanctuary was gone. And according to Margaret, my own husband had helped plan its destruction. I'm not stuck, I said, but my voice sounded hollow even to me. Aren't you? Margaret asked. When's the last time you bought something new for this house? When's the last time you made a change that wasn't about preserving the past? You're 26 years old, Samantha, but you're living like you're 66, and you're trying to drag Jake down with you. The delivery men finished positioning the last piece of furniture and left, taking with them the final evidence that this room had ever been anything other than a bland, forgettable space. Margaret gathered her purse and headed toward the door, pausing to admire her handiwork. I'll be back tomorrow to finish the upstairs. And Samantha, you might want to think about what I said. Jake's a good man, but even good men have limits. Don't push him past his. After she left, I stood alone in what used to be my living room and tried to recognize anything that felt like home. But it was like standing in a hotel lobby, clean, tasteful, and completely devoid of any trace of the people who were supposed to live there. For the first time since this nightmare began, I wondered if Margaret Thompson might actually win.
That night, I did something I'd never done before in my adult life. I got drunk. Not tipsy, not relaxed, but completely, devastatingly drunk on a bottle of wine I found hidden behind some cleaning supplies in the basement. It was Grandma Rose's wine, probably saved for some special occasion that never came. I sat on the floor of my transformed living room, surrounded by beige furniture that felt like it belonged in a psychiatric facility, and drank wine while crying over photo albums. Pictures of family Christmases in front of the old china cabinet, of birthday parties where we'd used the good dishes, of quiet Sunday mornings in Grandma Rose's burgundy armchair. Somewhere around midnight, in that particular state of intoxicated clarity that only comes from grief and desperation, I decided I was going to find evidence that Margaret had stolen my belongings. Real evidence, not just the word of confused painters and my own suspicions. I pulled up Margaret's Facebook page on my phone, scrolling through months of posts about book clubs and charity luncheons and perfectly arranged dinner parties. Nothing suspicious there. Margaret Thompson was far too smart to post photos of stolen antiques on social media. But then I remembered something Jake had mentioned months ago. Margaret had recently joined some kind of antique collecting group, something she'd gotten into after retirement. What was it called? Something about preservation? Historical preservation? I searched through her friends list until I found it. She was connected to something called the Tri-County Historical Preservation Society. I clicked through to their page and found myself looking at dozens of photos from their monthly meetings, their estate sale excursions, their private buying and selling events. And there, in a photo posted just 6 hours earlier,
was Margaret Thompson standing next to a display table at what looked like a private collector's event. The caption read, "Margaret T. brought some beautiful additions to tonight's exclusive viewing, including a rare complete set of 1890s Haviland porcelain with hand-painted forget-me-nots." My hands shook as I zoomed in on the photo. There was my grandmother's china, arranged on a white tablecloth like it was for sale. Not donated to charity, not in storage, being hawked to collectors at some kind of underground antique market. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was seeing Margaret's face in the photo, beaming with pride as she stood next to my family's heritage like she'd discovered it in her own attic. I screenshotted the photo and started digging deeper into the group's page. What I found made my blood run cold. This wasn't just a casual collectors club. It was a network of people who specialized in acquiring and flipping estate items, often from families who didn't understand their true value. They had code words, strategies for convincing people to sell family heirlooms for far less than they were worth. They shared stories about educating younger family members about the burden of maintaining old things. They even had guides for identifying which pieces in an estate were most valuable, which ones could be easily replicated with cheaper alternatives, and how to approach grieving families who might be overwhelmed by inheritance decisions. Margaret Thompson wasn't just a controlling mother-in-law who'd gotten carried away redecorating my house. She was part of an organized group that made money by exploiting people's emotional attachments to family belongings. I kept scrolling through the group's posts, and what I found made me nauseous all over again. Margaret had been posting about my house for weeks, long before Jake's trip to Chicago. She'd shared photos of my living room, describing it as a treasure trove owned by young people who don't appreciate what they have. She'd asked for advice about the best approach for acquiring pieces from resistant family members. The group had given her detailed strategies, everything from the overwhelming kindness approach to the family intervention method, to something they called temporary displacement leading to permanent acquisition. Margaret had followed their playbook perfectly. But the post that made me actually throw up was one from 3 days ago, right after Jake had left for Chicago. Margaret had written, "Phase 1 complete, items secured. Family member becoming emotional as expected, but son is supportive of modernization efforts. Will proceed with phase 2, replacement and normalization, while family member is isolated. This collection should bring substantial return at next month's private auction." My grandmother's china wasn't just stolen, it was being prepared for sale to the highest bidder, and Margaret had been planning this theft for weeks. I scrolled through the comments on Margaret's post, and they made me feel sick all over again. Other group members congratulating her on her successful acquisition, sharing similar stories about manipulating families into giving up valuable heirlooms, offering tips for managing emotional resistance from younger generation family members. One comment stood out. "Have you considered the documentation angle? Sometimes these old families have paperwork hidden away that adds provenance value, letters, receipts, family records. Check attics, basements, built-in storage areas. Amazing what people leave behind walls and floorboards." Margaret had responded, "Excellent point. We'll investigate tomorrow. The house dates to 1894, plenty of potential hiding spots." I sat up straighter, the wine fog clearing from my brain. Margaret was planning to search my house for hidden documents that might make my grandmother's belongings even more valuable. But more importantly, she clearly didn't know if such documents existed, which meant I needed to find them first. I'd lived in this house for 2 years and had never thought to look for hidden storage areas or secret compartments. But Victorian houses were famous for their quirky architectural features: hidden panels, storage nooks, spaces behind stairs and under floorboards. Still drunk, but now with a sense of purpose, I grabbed a flashlight from the kitchen drawer and started searching. I began in the basement, running my hands along the stone walls, looking for loose panels or hollow spaces. Nothing. The main floor was next.
I searched behind every piece of furniture Margaret hadn't replaced, checked inside the built-in china cabinet for false backs or hidden drawers, even pulled back the edges of rugs to look for loose floorboards. In the dining room, something caught my eye. The baseboards were original to the house, made of thick oak with decorative molding, but along the wall where Grandma Rose's old sideboard used to sit, one section of baseboard looked slightly different, cleaner, less aged than the rest. I knelt down and examined it more closely. The nails were different too, newer and not as tarnished as the ones in the rest of the room. Someone had removed this section and replaced it, probably within the last decade. Using a butter knife from the kitchen, I carefully pried at the edge of the baseboard. It came away easily, revealing a hollow space behind it, about 2 feet wide and 6 inches deep. Inside was a metal document box, the kind used for important papers. My heart pounding, I pulled out the box and carried it to the kitchen table. It wasn't locked, but the latch was stiff with age. When it finally opened, I found myself looking at dozens of documents, photographs, and letters dating back over a century. The first thing I saw was a marriage certificate from 1919, my great-great-grandparents, William and Rose Mitchell. Rose, my Grandma Rose, had been named for her grandmother. Underneath were more documents, property deeds, immigration papers, birth certificates. But it was the envelope marked "For Samantha Rose Miller" in my grandmother's handwriting that made me start crying again. Inside the envelope was a letter dated just 6 months before Grandma Rose died, along with several official-looking documents. My dearest Sammy, if you're reading this, it means something has happened to me and you've inherited the house. I hope that's many years from now, and that I got to see you graduate from college and maybe even meet the man you'll marry. The documents in this box are important, but I want you to understand why I'm hiding them rather than keeping them in a safety deposit box or with my regular papers. Our family has something that certain people might want to take from us. The china set you love so much, the one with the forget-me-nots, isn't just valuable because it's old or pretty. It belonged to your great-great-grandmother Rose, who brought it with her when she fled Austria in 1918. Rose wasn't just any refugee, Sammy. She was Rose Habsburg Lorraine, a minor member of the Austrian royal family. When the empire collapsed, she escaped with nothing but the clothes on her back and a single trunk containing her most precious possessions, including a complete set of porcelain commissioned by Empress Elizabeth herself. The china is worth more than money, sweetheart. It's a piece of European history, documented and authenticated by the papers in this box. But more than that, it represents courage, survival, and the strength of women who refused to give up even when they lost everything else. I never told anyone else about this because I was afraid they'd try to convince me to sell it, or donate it to a museum, or turn our family story into something public and complicated. I wanted it to stay in our family, to be used and loved and passed down the way Rose intended. But I also know that knowledge like this can be dangerous. There are people who make their living finding and acquiring pieces like this from families who don't know their true value. If anyone ever tries to pressure you into selling the china or tells you it's just old dishes, you show them these papers. The authentication documents are from 1962, when I had the set appraised after your grandfather died. The insurance appraisal from last year is in here too. Sammy, that china set is worth more than the house itself. But here's what's most important. It's yours now. Not just the dishes, but the choice of what to do with them. Maybe you'll use them every day, like I taught you. Maybe you'll donate them to preserve the history. Maybe you'll sell them and use the money to build something wonderful. Whatever you choose, make sure it's your choice. Don't let anyone pressure you, manipulate you, or trick you into giving up something that belongs to you. You come from a long line of strong women, and I know you'll make the right decision when the time comes. All my love, Grandma Rose. P.S. The rest of the furniture has stories too, but nothing as dramatic as the china.
I've included documentation for everything, just in case. I sat in my ruined kitchen holding papers that proved my stolen china set was worth hundreds of thousands of dollars, potentially over $1 million, and felt something I hadn't experienced in days. Power. Margaret Thompson had stolen a collection she thought was worth a few $1,000s to flip at an antique auction. Instead, she'd committed a felony theft of documented royal artifacts. And tomorrow, when she came back to search for exactly the kind of papers I was now holding, I was going to be ready for her. I spent the rest of the night photographing every document, uploading copies to cloud storage, and researching the legal penalties for art theft in Iowa. I also looked up the FBI's art crime team and read about their work recovering stolen cultural artifacts. By dawn, I had a plan. Not just to get my belongings back, but to make sure Margaret Thompson learned exactly what happened to people who preyed on grieving families and stole their heritage. Margaret had made one crucial mistake in all her careful planning. She assumed I was just a naive young woman who didn't know the value of what she owned. She was about to discover just how wrong she had been.
I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I spent the pre-dawn hours methodically building what my grandfather used to call an ironclad case. By 6 a.m., I had digital copies of every authentication document stored in 3 separate cloud accounts, a detailed timeline of Margaret's theft documented with screenshots from her Facebook group, and contact information for the FBI's art crime team, the Iowa State Police, and 2 different attorneys who specialized in art recovery. But most importantly, I had a plan that would give Margaret exactly what she deserved while protecting myself and getting my family's heritage back. The first call I made was to Detective Sarah Chen with the Cedar Falls Police Department. I'd found her name online. She specialized in property crimes and had a reputation for taking theft cases seriously, especially ones involving elderly victims or family manipulation. Detective Chen, my name is Samantha Miller, and I need to report a major theft. But it's complicated, and I think you're going to want to see the evidence before we proceed. An hour later, Detective Chen sat at my kitchen table reviewing the documents I'd found while I walked her through Margaret's systematic theft of my belongings. She was younger than I'd expected, maybe early 30s, with sharp eyes that didn't miss details. "Mrs. Miller," she said after studying the authentication papers for the 3rd time, "if these documents are legitimate, we're talking about a theft in the hundreds of thousands of dollars. That's a Class B felony in Iowa, possibly federal charges depending on whether the items cross state lines." "The documents are legitimate," I said, showing her the 1962 authentication report with its official seals and signatures. My grandmother had them appraised multiple times over the years. The most recent insurance assessment puts the complete set at $850,000, but that was 3 years ago. With the current market for Habsburg artifacts, it could be worth significantly more. Detective Chen photographed each document with her phone. "And you're certain Mrs. Thompson has these items?" I showed her the Facebook screenshots, including Margaret's posts about the successful acquisition and plans for the next month's private auction. "Jesus," Detective Chen muttered, scrolling through the evidence. "This woman is part of an organized network. We've been getting reports about groups like this. They target families dealing with inheritances, deaths, divorces. They present themselves as helpful friends or relatives while systematically looting valuable estates." "Can you arrest her?" "Not yet. I need to verify that the items she has match the descriptions in your authentication documents, and I need to confirm that she doesn't have some kind of legitimate claim to them. But Mrs. Miller, if everything you're showing me checks out, Margaret Thompson is in serious legal trouble." Detective Chen explained the process. They'd need to get search warrants for Margaret's house and storage areas, possibly coordinate with other jurisdictions if the items had already been moved. It could take days or even weeks. "But," she said with a slight smile, "there is something we can do immediately. That Facebook group you found? They're planning an auction event next weekend, according to their page. We can get undercover officers there to document what's being sold and by whom. What do I do in the meantime? She's planning to come back to my house today to search for more documents. She doesn't know I found them first. Detective Chen's smile widened. Actually, that gives us an opportunity. Would you be willing to let her search while recording everything she says and does? Sometimes the best evidence comes from people incriminating themselves. The idea of facing Margaret again, especially now that I knew the true scope of her crimes, made my stomach clench. But I also felt something I hadn't experienced in days: anticipation. Margaret Thompson thought she was dealing with a naive young woman she could manipulate and rob. She had no idea she was walking into a trap. "I'll do it," I said. Detective Chen helped me set up a small recording device in the living room and showed me how to use my phone to record video without being obvious about it. We also arranged a signal. If I felt unsafe, or if Margaret became threatening, I'd text the word emergency to Detective Chen's number and backup officers would arrive within minutes. "Remember," Detective Chen said as she prepared to leave, "your job is just to let her talk and document what she does. Don't accuse her, don't let on that you know about the theft network, and don't put yourself in danger. We need her to incriminate herself voluntarily." After Detective Chen left, I spent the morning preparing for Margaret's visit. I put the document box back in its hiding place behind the baseboard, but left one corner of the baseboard slightly loose as if it had been recently discovered and hastily replaced. I wanted Margaret to find the hiding spot, but believed she was the first person to do so. I also called my friend Jessica, who worked as a paralegal at a law firm in Cedar Rapids. Without going into the full details, I asked her to research the best attorneys in Iowa for art recovery and cultural heritage cases. "Sam, this sounds serious. Are you okay? Do you need me to come over?" "I'm okay," which was actually true for the first time in days, but I might need legal representation soon, and I want to be prepared. "I'll send you some names within the hour. And Sam, whatever's going on, document everything. Dates, times, conversations, witnesses. If this ends up in court, you'll want a paper trail." Margaret arrived at exactly 2 o'clock, just as she had every other day. But this time, I was ready for her. "Samantha, dear," she said, sweeping through my front door with her usual commanding presence, "I thought we could tackle the upstairs today. I brought some lovely paint samples for the bedrooms." "That sounds great, Mrs. Thompson," I said, my voice carefully neutral. I'd practiced this conversation in my head all morning, how to seem defeated and compliant while actually gathering evidence. "I'm so glad you're being reasonable about all this," Margaret said, examining the beige living room with obvious satisfaction. "I know the changes have been overwhelming, but you'll see how much better everything looks when it's all finished." She set down her purse and pulled out a folder full of paint chips and fabric samples. "Now, for the master bedroom, I was thinking a soft gray would be lovely, very calming, very modern, and we'll definitely want to replace that old sewing machine. It's just taking up space." "Actually," I said, feigning hesitation, "I've been thinking about what you said yesterday, about Jake feeling like a stranger in his own home. Maybe you're right. Maybe I have been too focused on preserving old things instead of building new memories." Margaret's face lit up. This was exactly what she had been working toward, my complete surrender to her vision of how my life should look. "Oh, Samantha, I'm so pleased to hear you say that. It takes real maturity to recognize when it's time to let go of the past. Jake is going to be thrilled." "I guess I'm just worried about throwing away things that might be valuable," I said carefully. "Like, what if some of Grandma Rose's things were worth more than I realized?" Margaret waved a dismissive hand. "Honey, I've been dealing with antiques and collectibles for years. Trust me, most of what people think is valuable really isn't. Those dishes of your grandmother's, pretty but fairly common. The furniture, well made but not particularly sought after. Sometimes sentimental value makes us overestimate monetary worth." I nodded as if this made perfect sense, all while my phone recorded her casually lying about items she knew were worth nearly $1 million.
Although, Margaret continued, and I saw her expression change subtly, it never hurts to be thorough. Sometimes old families kept documentation about their belongings, receipts, appraisals, family records. Your grandmother's generation went through the Depression. They learned to hide valuable things in places thieves wouldn't think to look. Papers? I asked, as if the idea hadn't occurred to me. I haven't seen anything like that. Where would she have kept them? Oh, you'd be surprised where people hide important documents, especially in old houses like this one. Built-in storage areas, spaces behind walls, under floorboards. Your grandmother's generation went through the Depression. They learned to hide valuable things in places thieves wouldn't think to look.
Margaret's eyes were already scanning the room, looking for potential hiding spots. She was practically vibrating with excitement at the thought of finding more treasures to steal. Should we look? I asked innocently. I mean, if there are papers that prove things are valuable, I'd want to know before donating them. Absolutely, Margaret said, already moving toward the dining room. Let's start down here and work our way up. For the next hour, I watched Margaret Thompson systematically search my house for hidden valuables while my phone recorded every word she said and every action she took. She examined baseboards, checked behind picture frames, even moved furniture to look for loose floorboards. Her technique was clearly practiced. She knew exactly where to look and how to search efficiently. This wasn't her first time looting someone's home. You know, she said as she examined the built-in bookshelves in the living room, I've helped several families go through estates over the years. You'd be amazed what people overlook. I once found bearer bonds worth $50,000 hidden inside a hollowed-out book. Really? What happened to the bonds? Oh, the family was so grateful I found them. They gave me a finder's fee, of course. It's only fair when someone helps discover hidden assets. I bet they did, I thought grimly. I wondered how many grateful families had been manipulated into giving Margaret Thompson substantial percentages of their own inheritance. Did you find other valuable things in their houses? I asked. Margaret smiled, clearly enjoying sharing stories of her successful conquests. Well, there was this beautiful set of Dresden figurines that the family thought were just decorative knickknacks, worth over $30,000 it turned out, and a Civil War sword that had been hanging in a closet, authenticated Union officer's blade worth $15,000. What happened to those? Oh, the families let me handle the sales for them. I have connections in the antique world. I can get much better prices than they could at regular auctions. Everyone wins. Everyone wins, except the families who never saw most of the money from their own belongings, I thought. Margaret moved into the dining room and immediately zeroed in on the section of baseboard where I'd found the document box. She knelt down and examined it closely, running her fingers along the edge. Samantha, she called, her voice tight with excitement. Come look at this. This baseboard has been removed recently. See how the wood is cleaner here? And these nails are newer than the others. Oh my goodness, I said, putting just the right amount of surprise in my voice. Do you think there's something behind there? Only one way to find out, Margaret said, pulling a small pry bar from her purse. Apparently, she came prepared for treasure hunting. She carefully removed the baseboard section, and I watched her face transform when she saw the empty space behind it. There was definitely something here, she said, examining the hollow area. Recently, too. There's no dust accumulation. Samantha, did your grandmother ever mention hiding anything in the walls? No, never, I lied. But maybe she put important papers somewhere safe. Should we check the other walls? Margaret spent another 30 minutes searching for more hidden compartments while I documented her systematic looting attempts. She checked every room, every wall, every piece of furniture that hadn't already been removed. Finally, frustrated and empty-handed, she stood in the middle of my living room and looked around with calculating eyes. Samantha, she said slowly, I need to ask you something, and I want you to be completely honest with me. Of course. Have you been through all of your grandmother's papers?
Everything in her desk, her filing cabinets, any boxes she might have left in the attic or basement. I think so, I said. There were some old photographs and family records, but nothing that seemed important, just birth certificates and things like that. Margaret's eyes sharpened. Family records can be very important, dear, especially for establishing provenance of family heirlooms. Do you still have those papers? I think they're in a box somewhere. Why? Well, Margaret said, her voice taking on that familiar patronizing tone, sometimes old families had more valuable things than they realized. If your grandmother kept documentation about the china set, for instance, it might affect the insurance replacement value. Oh, I said, as if this was a revelation. Should I look for them? Why don't we look together? I might recognize important documents that you'd overlook. I led Margaret upstairs to the bedroom, where I'd prepared a box of random family papers, birth certificates, old letters, newspaper clippings, but nothing related to the china or its authentication. Margaret spent 20 minutes going through every paper in the box, clearly frustrated that she wasn't finding what she was looking for. These are mostly just personal family documents, she said dismissively. Nothing about appraisals or provenance. Are you sure this is everything? I think so, I said. But, Mrs. Thompson, why is provenance so important? I mean, the dishes are pretty, but they're just family china, right? Margaret paused, and I could see her calculating how much to tell me. She clearly wanted to find authentication documents that would make my china even more valuable for her illegal auction, but she couldn't admit that without revealing her true intentions. Well, she said carefully, sometimes old china sets have interesting histories, European manufacturers, royal connections, that sort of thing. It doesn't make them more valuable necessarily, but collectors like to know the stories behind pieces. Royal connections? I asked, injecting just the right amount of curiosity into my voice. Like connected to actual royalty? Sometimes, Margaret said, and I could practically see her greed overriding her caution, especially pieces that came from Austria or Germany in the early 1900s. Political upheaval meant a lot of royal and aristocratic families had to flee, and they sometimes brought valuable items with them. Do you think Grandma Rose's china could be something like that? Margaret's smile was predatory. Well, it's possible. The forget-me-not pattern and the particular style of hand painting, it's reminiscent of pieces made for the Habsburg court, but without documentation, there's no way to prove it. I nodded thoughtfully, as if this was all news to me, while my phone recorded Margaret Thompson essentially confessing that she knew exactly what she'd stolen and why it was extraordinarily valuable. I suppose we'll never know, I said wistfully. No, Margaret agreed, but I could see the wheels turning in her head. She wasn't giving up on finding those authentication papers. She was just getting started. And tomorrow, when Detective Chen served the search warrant, Margaret Thompson was going to discover that all of her careful planning had led her straight into a trap that would destroy her life just as thoroughly as she tried to destroy mine. The next morning, I woke up to my phone buzzing with a text from Detective Chen. Search warrant approved. Executing at 9 a.m. Stay away from Thompson residence until we contact you. I made coffee and sat in my destroyed living room, surrounded by Margaret's beige furniture, waiting for justice to finally catch up with her. But at 8:30, my phone rang with an unknown number. Samantha, it's Margaret. I need you to meet me at the house immediately. There's been a development. Her voice sounded different, strained, almost panicked. What kind of development? I found something. Documents that belong to your grandmother, very important documents that I think you need to see right away. My blood went cold. Margaret had somehow found more papers, or she was trying one last desperate manipulation before the police arrived. Either way, I wasn't about to meet her alone. Can't it wait? I'm not feeling well this morning. No, it cannot wait, Margaret snapped, and now she sounded like a completely different person. Harsh, commanding, dangerous. Samantha, I'm going to be very clear with you. You have 30 minutes to get to this house, or you're going to regret it for the rest of your life." The line went dead. I immediately called Detective Chen. She's panicked about something. She wants me to come to her house alone, and she sounded threatening. "Absolutely not," Detective Chen said. "We're 15 minutes out from executing the warrant. She probably got wind somehow that we're coming. Stay exactly where you are." But 10 minutes later, my phone buzzed with a text message that made my heart stop. It was a photo of Grandma Rose's Haviland china set, laid out on what looked like Margaret's kitchen counter. But in the photo, a hammer was positioned next to the delicate porcelain pieces. The text that followed was brief. "You have 20 minutes, or I start breaking things." I called Detective Chen immediately. "She's threatening to destroy the china if I don't come to her house. We're pulling up to her street right now. Do not go there, Samantha. If she destroys evidence, that's additional charges against her. But if you put yourself in danger, I can't protect you." Those dishes are nearly 1,000 years of family history. They survived the fall of an empire, World War I, the Depression, World War II. I can't let her destroy them now. Against Detective Chen's explicit orders, I got in my car and drove to Margaret's house. But instead of going to the front door, I parked down the street and called Jake. He answered on the first ring. "Sam, what's wrong? You sound terrified." "Jake, I need you to listen to me very carefully, and I need you to believe what I'm about to tell you no matter how crazy it sounds." I told him everything: the stolen china, the authentication documents, the Facebook group, the planned auction, Margaret's threats. I told him about Detective Chen, about the search warrant that was being executed right now, about the hammer positioned next to our family's priceless heritage. The silence on the other end of the line stretched so long I thought we'd been disconnected. "Jake? My mother stole your grandmother's china?" His voice was barely a whisper. "She didn't just steal it, Jake. She's part of an organized group that targets families dealing with inheritance. They manipulate people into giving up valuable items, then sell them at underground auctions. She's been planning this for weeks, long before you left for Chicago." "The texts she showed me," Jake said slowly, "about you being stuck in the past, about me feeling like a stranger in our house. I never sent those texts, Sam." "I know." "She faked them. She faked my complaints to manipulate both of us." I could hear him processing this, his voice getting harder. "Where are you right now?" "Outside her house. The police are executing a search warrant, but she's threatening to destroy the china if I don't meet with her alone." "Don't you dare go in that house," Jake said fiercely. "I'm coming home, right now. I'm leaving Chicago and driving straight there." "Jake, your job." "Fuck my job, Sam. My mother stole from my wife and manipulated our entire marriage. She destroyed our home and threatened you. The job can wait." While we were talking, I saw police cars pulling into Margaret's driveway. Detective Chen and 3 other officers approached the front door, warrant in hand. "The police are here," I told him Jake. "I can see them at the front door." Through the phone, I could hear Jake starting his car. "I'll be there in 6 hours. Don't do anything dangerous, and don't let my mother anywhere near you until I get there." I watched from down the street as Detective Chen rang Margaret's doorbell. Even from a distance, I could see Margaret answer the door, her posture rigid and defensive. The conversation at the front door lasted less than 2 minutes before Margaret stepped aside and let the officers enter her house. I waited in my car, hands shaking, wondering what they were finding inside. My phone rang again. Detective Chen. "Samantha, are you safe?" "I'm parked down the street watching your cars." "Good. I need you to know that we found everything. The china, the furniture, boxes of documentation from other thefts. This woman has been running the scam for years, targeting dozens of families. Your case is just the tip of the iceberg." "Is the china okay? She threatened to smash it."
"It's fine. She never had any intention of destroying it. Too valuable. The hammer was just a prop to scare you into compliance. But Samantha, we also found something else. Something you need to see." An hour later, I sat in Margaret's pristine living room, now cluttered with evidence bags and police equipment, while Detective Chen showed me what they discovered in Margaret's bedroom closet. It was a detailed file on my family, going back 3 generations. Margaret had researched everything:
property records, death certificates, family histories, even old newspaper articles about my great-great-grandmother's arrival from Austria. She'd known about the Habsburg connection before she ever met me. "She's been planning this theft since before you married Jake," Detective Chen explained. "She encouraged the relationship because she wanted access to your inheritance. When Jake proposed, she saw it as her ticket to a major score." The file contained notes in Margaret's handwriting that made me sick to read. Family unaware of true value, young woman emotionally attached but financially naive, son can be manipulated through career concerns, target optimal during husband's absence. She'd planned everything: the timing of Jake's trip, the contractors, even the beige furniture that would replace my grandmother's antiques. It was a carefully orchestrated heist that had taken nearly 2 years to set up. "What happens now?" I asked. "Margaret Thompson is under arrest for theft, fraud, and conspiracy. Based on what we found here, she's looking at 25 to life under Iowa's habitual offender statute. The other members of her theft network are being rounded up as we speak." Detective Chen handed me an evidence bag containing my grandmother's china. "This is being returned to you, along with all the other stolen items. The authentication documents you found prove ownership beyond any doubt." I held the bag containing the delicate forget-me-not plates and started crying for the first time in days. Not tears of grief or frustration, but of relief and vindication. "There's something else," Detective Chen said. "We found correspondence between Margaret and several auction houses. She wasn't just stealing from you. She was planning to claim that she had inherited these items from her own family. She had forged provenance documents prepared, fake family trees, even a fictional story about her Austrian grandmother. She was going to erase my family's history completely and replace it with her own. If you hadn't found those authentication papers when you did, she might have gotten away with it." That evening, I sat in my living room, still full of Margaret's horrible beige furniture, but with Grandma Rose's china cabinet restored to its proper place, filled once again with the Haviland porcelain that had traveled from the Habsburg court to a Victorian house in Iowa. Jake arrived just after sunset, having driven straight from Chicago without stopping. When I opened the front door, he looked like he'd aged 10 years in one day. "Sam," he said, and then just held me while I told him everything that had happened. "I believed her," he said when I finished the story, "about you being stuck in the past, about the house feeling like a museum. She made it sound like I'd said those things, like I was just too kind to tell you directly." "Did you feel that way? Even a little?" Jake looked around the room, at the ugly, neutral furniture and the bare beige walls where Grandma Rose's beautiful wallpaper had been. "You want to know what I really feel about this house? I feel like someone came in and ripped out its heart. This place had soul, Sam. It had warmth and history and personality. Now it looks like a hotel room. We can fix it. The wallpaper can be restored. We can get new furniture that actually fits the house. We're not just going to fix it," Jake said firmly. "We're going to make it better than it ever was. And Sam, my mother is never setting foot in this house. Not ever." 3 months later, our house looked like home again. We'd found an amazing restoration specialist who recreated Grandma Rose's wallpaper from photographs, sourced period-appropriate furniture from estate sales, and even located replacement pieces for the items Margaret had already sold to other collectors. The legal case made national news when the full scope of Margaret's theft network was revealed. She'd stolen from over 40 families across 3 states, targeting people dealing with deaths, divorces, and other life transitions. The total value of stolen goods exceeded $2 million. Margaret Thompson was sentenced to 15 years in federal prison. The insurance settlement from her other victims helped us establish the Rose Habsburg Lorraine Foundation, which helps families identify and protect valuable family heirlooms from theft and fraud. We kept Grandma Rose's china, but we also loan pieces to museums so people can learn about the history of Austrian refugees who rebuilt their lives in America. Jake got promoted anyway. His company was so impressed with how he'd handled the family crisis while still completing his training program that they offered him a position in their fraud investigation department. And me? I learned that sometimes the people who try to erase your history only make you stronger in claiming it. Every Sunday, Jake and I still eat dinner off those precious forget-me-not plates, just like Grandma Rose taught me. But now I know that every meal is an act of defiance against people who think they can steal your legacy. Every time I serve food on dishes that survived the fall of empires, I'm honoring not just my great-great-grandmother Rose, but every woman who refused to let others define what her life should look like. Margaret Thompson thought she could manipulate a naive young woman into giving up her inheritance. Instead, she taught me exactly how strong I really am. And that's a lesson worth more than all the china in the world.
Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.